Welcome back from the groups. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I hope it was fun. So now we ask Tim to continue with the reports.
Okay, as we go to the groups, this is a session for you, in a sense, that you may now share a little more broadly. So if the secretary, when I nominate a group, could the secretary give a brief account of what people found that was new or surprising? And then please raise one question, and we together shall try to respond to that question before we go to another group. So could I ask Spanish-speaking group, Candido, could you please tell us?
Ok, gracias.
Okay.
Para nosotros, como algo nuevo, dijimos que no se había pensado en esa propuesta de interculturalidad dentro de la Biblia, sobre todo con la lectura que tomamos ayer del texto de Cornelius. Luego, la distinción, la diferencia, las características de las generaciones X y Y, ya que es fundamental entendernos, sabiendo que somos comunidades intergeneracionales y que convivimos con jóvenes. Una de las preguntas es cómo ayudar a los jóvenes para que integren en su vida personal la dirección espiritual y para que cuando salgan de la formación sea parte de su vida.
Thank you, Candido. I will maintain my conversation in English for the sake of translation and conversation. Big question. And I think how to help people pick up a habit of spiritual direction and continue the habit of spiritual direction is indeed a challenge and needs to probably go beyond your formation houses. It seems to me it would be a good topic for formators to send so it has conversation at a chapter or at least at an assembly. It could be your provincial chapter or your general chapter. I think it's that important. If you think it's that important, then you do your best in your formation houses, and then you bring it to the attention of people who are community leaders and congregational leaders so that they are doing their part. In many places, we simply don't provide names of spiritual directors for people. It's that simple. We don't do the homework. Therefore, people don't go looking. So there's probably quite a lot we can do. My guess is you in formation are doing a lot, but certainly raising the idea with your students that if they find this valuable, they need to be proactive in seeking spiritual direction into the future. When I first went to Mexico as a seminarian, I went with the habit of spiritual direction. After 6 weeks, I decided I needed spiritual direction, even though I was just learning Spanish. So I went down to the local parish and knocked on the door. It was a Carmelite parish, and the priest who answered the door was happy to provide spiritual direction. So I did my best to explain myself and my spiritual life in the Spanish that I had, and he was very encouraging. It was only many years later that I realized that priest was Camilo Machise. He's a rather famous author in Mexico and speaks 8 different languages, including English. He never told me that at the time. He encouraged me to really try and express myself in Spanish. And that was very important. He did well. So I believe you can certainly put more focus on this, but also take it to another level. If you believe it's important, take it to your congregational level. Does anyone else have any suggestions while we are on that topic? Quite happy to listen to people. Who else has wisdom? Question?
Jean-Pierre?
Ah, bonjour. Oui, moi j'ai été intéressé au fait par la catégorisation des deux générations, la génération X et la génération Y. Alors on en a aussi discuté un peu avec Philippe dans le Carrefour, un peu pour dire quels sont au fait les critères de cette catégorisation qui ont amené à la classification de ces deux générations-là. Oh, et puis, par rapport à cela, on a été aussi intéressé de voir est-ce qu'il n'y a pas moyen que les deux générations puissent apprendre l'une de l'autre. Voilà. Donc, c'est un peu ça la question. Allô, vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez?
Are asking the two generations X, Y to understand each other. Is that your question?
Yeah, what I mean is you were talking about the two generations. Is there any way that the two generations can learn from each other? And what are the criteria which leads to this differentiation between the two generations? Is that technology or what? I don't know.
Sure. The only advantage I see in trying to classify the generations is so that we are aware there are differences. I think generations X and Y already have good communication. I don't think it is so difficult. I think it is the communication between generations X and Y and older members that requires your attention. I think X and Y generally manage quite well. And it is mostly the media that creates these sort of artificial classifications or categories. But indeed, it is very clear that each generation of people is different from the last. Even my generation was different from the generation before me. And it is the habit of the older generations to criticize the newer generations. It's like our job description, and we have to get out of that attitude and try and learn from each other and be a little more open. But in intergenerational, there needs to be some focus on trying to help the generations understand each other, learn from each other, appreciate and respect each other. And that is work that may not be needed in your houses of formation if you are generally younger people. But some of your formation houses will also have older members, or you must prepare your younger members to go after final vows to houses where there are older members. And that's where both groups need to prepare to really meet each other where they are. But the classifications are artificial and don't matter so much, simply to say that, yes, the generations are different and the changes are happening faster and faster as we go into these new generations, Jean-Pierre.
Okay, thank you. I suggest that we continue with the groups.
Yep.
So we stay with the questions from the groups so that we'll be able to touch all the other groups, okay? So I don't know if the questions raised by the group one, I think it's okay now, so we can proceed to the next group. Thank you.
So the next group I have here, it's an English-speaking group with Gregory as a participant. I don't know who the secretary is. could the secretary of that group please respond?
I am the secretary.
Oh,
Tim.
congratulations. Hi, Gregory. So a little about your sharing and then something about your question.
Yeah, I'm in a group with Gregory, Sati, Tidis, and much of the discussion of the sharing is on the use of technology in the formation houses. Some of us are still at a loss on how to manage technology in the formation houses because, as you said earlier, that it's being used, and so it is allowed also. It should be in a way used appropriately in the formation houses, but still the formators are wary about misuse and abuse of this. So at a loss at how to approach that.
Yeah.
There's also the confirmation of the need for instruction to this generation. Because sometimes we presume that they know what to do. But as you were saying earlier, that this generation needs also instruction, clear instruction. So I think we have to know that the generation and what they need. There is also in the sharing on the challenge of making conscious the unconscious in the culture, and it's something really tough for how to do that. And because it presumes that we dig much into the culture and get to know the culture itself. And intergenerational differences also is very much true to our experiences. So how do we understand each generation, as Jean-Pierre also was pointing out earlier.
Yeah. Rossif, you as formators have your radar up on all of those, then you are doing well.
Okay.
So if you acknowledge that these are issues that require your time, your prayer, your discernment, and your collaboration, then you are doing well. It's the communities that ignore them that are in more trouble. So surely the use of technology is moving very, very quickly. The use of technology for matters like viewing pornography is a serious, serious matter, particularly for men religious, for men, but particularly for men religious. And it's one of those taboo topics. We don't talk about it. So to try and creatively bring these matters to your communities for discussion, adult discussion, I think is important. You can use friends or other professionals to come in and maybe assist, but that there are not taboo topics in your communities, that you actually try and talk about everything if you can. And some of your students, but some of the formators are also in contact with their home regularly, maybe daily. And it consumes space and place, even to try and assist people to talk about etiquette, like when is it appropriate to take a call and when is it not? I have remember as provincial speaking with a confrere about a very serious matter, and he stopped the conversation. It was in my office, and he said, I need to take this call. It's a funeral I'm organizing. He took the call, organized the funeral, and then said, what were you saying, Tim? So I then had to contain my feelings, which were very strong at that stage, and I had two things to talk to him about. One was the important matter that we began the conversation about, and two was when it is appropriate to take a call and when it is not appropriate to take a call. He had no filter. And certainly for our younger people, they often have no filter to know what is appropriate and what is not. So even to have conversations about matters like that, in what space, in what place are things appropriate and when are they not? And if I go to another place, how might I need to modify my behavior and not always do what I think is the right thing to do, but consider others. So some of our younger people need to have these conversations. And as I said, they're adult conversations. But some of their responses will help you know whether they are appropriate for religious life or not. And they need to know that these conversations are important. Sometimes you will have them in groups, sometimes you will have them individually. But to say that you don't know where to go with these things is possibly not quite true, Ross. I think all of you have quite some resources in this area. It's still confusing because it's relatively new, but there are resources around and resources within you. And again, you'd be talking to your leadership and saying, well, what's the behavior of our final professed? Because it's not just an issue for initial formation. It goes well beyond that into our religious lives. Things that you believe are important in initial formation are so people can take up their religious lives. But if their brothers who are finally professed are behaving in ways that are inappropriate with regard to social media, it's really hard for younger guys to go into communities. They've learned a way to behave and they find that others are not doing that. The amount of private times in rooms, I think, is particularly dangerous for men in formation programs and men who are finally professed and ordained, because that is where we too lose our filter and we can engage in all sorts of things privately that once we were never able to do. We had to look at magazines, but now it's available on demand at any time. Many formation houses have put in filters so that pornography cannot be accessed. But our younger people are particularly creative, which in some ways is a good thing and in some ways is not such a good thing. But going back to the idea, Ross, that we need to try and bring topics that are below the water level, the iceberg, bring them to the surface and help the community to have some adult discussion about these things, particularly interculturally. And for some of our students, they've been taught not to speak about things that might make the formator or father lose face. Indeed, so there's a lot of work to be done there to help them say, well, we actually have permission to talk about things here, so let's do our best to talk freely. So putting boundaries in place, helping people talk in ways that mean that the safe space, what we say here, won't go outside these walls. It actually stays amongst the group. So they're tough things, and our intercultural nature makes them even more complex. But at the same time, there's a lot of hope in this. So I encourage you to keep trying to move things forward. Okay, might we move on? Is that okay, Ross? We'll move on to the next one.
Yes, thank you very much.
So, French group, Jean-Nicolas, your group?
I think the group had difficulties, so we can.
Okay, so we'll go to an English group. Andrew, your group, who was the secretary? Andrew.
We don't have a secretary, but but I started the conversation, and I think the group just allowed me to talk. So
Sure.
I might take the liberty to report back to the group. We have Father David from India, Father Sago from Bangladesh, Father Antonio Ponce from US, and also Father Lams from South Africa in our group. The different the new things and then things that we learned from the presentations we really like some of those practical examples and experiences that you share as formator yourself too. Those certainly help us to contextualize different things too. So we find it very useful. Topics on intergenerational community. That is, in a sense, a new insight in that. And also the quote about holding tension lightly. There's the intentional intercultural living. There, it requires intention. I think that is really important. And also the saying about not to set people to fail. And I think that's important for us to keep it in mind as formator too, that we're not there to police them to correct every mistake, but rather we're there to help them to succeed. And that's important. And also that spirituality part that we talk about, the Acts of the Apostles, the God has no favor, that is a very important sentence for us to keep in mind too, that we as formators, very important. And Father David shared about his own awareness in a sense that even in India, the reality of India, even though all students are from one country, and yet it is an intercultural reality because they come from different provinces, different cultures too. And that is a reality. That is, so we take a fair bit from the presentation, certainly. One questions, maybe can we mention two questions? But one of the questions, one of the question is really connected to the image of the iceberg. I suppose the question for the group is what are some of the ways that we can help to facilitate those conversations so that we can help to surface what is beneath the surface, so we can help to move into the visible side, so that we can talk, we can discuss among the group in a safe and respectful way. So that's one of the questions that we want to bring to the group. Yeah.
Okay. Certainly, I think I provided a couple of possible dynamics, non-threatening dynamics for sharing. But you also have resources around you. You have confreres who visit your communities. You also have some employees in your communities. Sometimes you can approach those people and say, well, what do you see in our community? What sorts of things do you see that perhaps I don't see, or we as the formation staff might not see? These people have quite some insights at times when they are asked that question. You can then bring that to your groups, to your formation community, and say, look, this has come up. Someone has seen this about us. What do you think of that? So to bring the unconscious to the conscious is a very difficult matter. If it's unconscious, you don't know it by definition. And sometimes you need others to help you identify things so that you then can bring them to the surface to talk about with your people. You'd be certainly, if it's a larger community, you'd want to be mixing ages and nationalities and personalities, trying not to have people who are very similar in the same group. If it's a small group, you can even call one or two members from another community to come and have those conversations with you. You can be quite creative in the ways that you undertake this. There are lots of different opportunities and possibilities. Remembering that if it's unconscious, you don't know about it by definition. But there are things you as formation staff can identify about your community that the students may not be conscious of. And so you have then the obligation to help them be conscious of these things. If you actually sit and think about things, you will find that even on the formation staff, each of you has a different view. And you can see some things that others on the staff actually have not seen. You'll find that you're quite good at this. If you do this with some regularity, and particularly if you do this in prayer, if you start this with a prayer and really ask the Spirit to help you discern what are some of the elements of the culture of our community that we need to raise amongst ourselves? So thanks, Andrew. Can we move to another group, Freeborn, your group?
Okay, I'm representing group 5. There was Andreas, Jesuraj, Subash, Francis Nalapan, and myself. What we discussed about what was surprising and new, these various aspects. The first one is that interculturality actually is connected to various aspects of our community life. So you can not only use interculturality only for language or meals, but it affects every aspect of our life. And so that is something that somebody said was very surprising indeed. And then the language spoken, and there's also not spoken language. So I think that's another thing which came conscious to our mind. And then there was the aspect of generation Y and adaptation to formation. How do we adapt these realities or characteristics? And I think that was very new to us, that we can take some of these characteristics of generation Y in our Formandi and adapt them in the formation aspect. So it's something new. Someone was also surprised that yes, there is a big gap, huge gap, because we are dealing with generation Y mostly. And so he said, I don't know what generation I am, but actually I'm dealing with people that are totally out of my line. So I think there's that aspect of surprise. And then how to adapt the new information in building bridges from these different generations. I think it's something that we said we need to, it's something new. And how can we build bridges with all these intergenerational aspect? And then there was also the first to appreciate the awakening that how do I first understand my culture before I even assume other people's culture? So it's very important to understand our own, where we come from, and then we need to be open to enter into dialogue and to have that openness. The other aspect also, again, is about that it's not just about language as spoken, but gestures are important. This came from the video that we watched today, that in terms of language, it comes beyond just spoken. So the gestures are important, and that is something that was experienced as new. So those are the areas that we talk about newness and also surprising. Yeah. And then the question is, the question is, maybe I'll put it in a statement form and then we make sense out of it. There's an aspect of the area that maybe we don't talk much about, and that is in the area of sexuality and in the area of alcoholism. So these are areas that come as part of the different cultural experiences of people. We mentioned that there are people that are a bit liberal in the area of sexuality, and there are people that are in the area conservative. It can be formators, it can be formandi. And so when they come with these experiences, it's a culture that is found in the scholastic and formation team. And how do we respond to this aspect of sexual intercultural, so to speak? And because the reality which we are living in our different houses of formation. Thanks.
Okay, Freeborn. This one is, like the others, very important, but issues like sex and sexuality and addictions are taboo topics in most cultures. Therefore, not only is the fact that they are not spoken about difficult, but it also means there's not language around them in any language. This has been one of the issues around the sexual abuse crisis, trying to put language in various languages across the world around some of the experiences of people. That's why they haven't been able to come forward easily with their experiences, because there's no words, or there were no words. We are now in the process of trying to invent vocabulary, language, concepts around some of the things that have happened to people who have been sexually abused. Once that work is done, and there are words, concepts, and ideas that are reasonably understood, then people can talk about it. So if I'm from a culture where sex and sexuality has not been spoken about much at all, it's not that I'm conservative or liberal. It means I just don't know how to approach the topic. So for most of you, as for me, I think you do need to get some further professional advice on this. How do you talk about things like sex and sexuality with a group of young men from different cultural backgrounds who are intending to take on a life of celibacy? These are very valid questions, and professional people are generally quite happy to help the best way they can. So as formation staff, you may seek to get some further advice on this area, and you can certainly prepare and present it in terms of the vow of chastity. It's a good way to look at it. But then the vow of poverty and obedience also need to be raised there as well. So you can come at it from a spiritual point of view, but you certainly need to help give your men some basic information about sex and sexuality. We did a little work here in the room this morning on that. It's not an easy topic to be talking about, but we tried. We had some information sharing this morning, but I'm really suggesting that all of you have access to some professional help in bringing this forward, and don't put it on that list of things that are too hard to do, therefore we don't do them. Otherwise, you're just perpetuating this taboo situation. But our young men deserve opportunities to get language with and talk about things, even in new languages, about things like this. Addictions is another one. We, in most societies, we just don't talk about addictions. It could be addiction to alcohol, to drugs, to food, to sex. And all of those exist in our religious communities. But we tend not to talk about them and turn away from them. So if we can help our younger people to be literate in these things in ways that they do have some language and do have possibilities to talk about things like this, we would be doing them and religious life a great favor, and the mission as well. Sorry, I can't say much more than that, Freeborn, but we do need just to move to the other groups.
Thank you. It's clarified.
Okay.
Thank you.
En français, Raymond? Joseph?
Ok. Notre groupe est composé de Père Raymond, Padre Roberto et moi-même. Dans la discussion, dans le partage, ce que nous avons trouvé de nouveau et peut-être qui nous a surpris, c'est, bon, les autres ont déjà parlé de ça, mais je reviens sur ça. C'est la différence entre les générations qui a été établie. Et nous, dans notre partage, nous avons jugé nécessaire que c'est quelque chose qu'il faut accepter, se connaître, et parce que il faut vivre dans la complémentarité. Ne pas dire que bon, peut-être l'autre génération est meilleure que l'autre. Le fait d'accepter cette différence va plutôt nous aider à vivre ensemble comme frères, justement. L'autre chose qui est de nouveau, peut-être une découverte aussi sur laquelle vous avez insisté, c'est que dans la formation, il y a des choses flexibles et des choses qu'on ne peut pas changer. Parce que quelqu'un a donné un témoignage, un jeune qui allait voir le formateur pour lui dire que bon, ici on prie beaucoup. Or, la prière, c'est un élément constitutif de la formation. Si on enlève la prière de la formation, je ne sais pas, c'est bien dans la formation. Et le fait d'insister sur la discipline. Donc, connaître cela dans la formation, la manière de vivre et aider les jeunes à avoir cette discipline-là. Question. Bon, nous avons posé deux. La première, vous avez déjà répondu à cela. Comment éduquer concrètement à l'utilisation des moyens de communication? Je passe à la deuxième. La deuxième question, comment concilier nos cultures d'origine
avec la culture chrétienne ou oblate. Comme vous avez dit, chacun vient avec une culture. Mais en vivant ensemble, nous avons au moins une culture qui unit la famille religieuse. Parlons un peu des oblats. Comment concilier cela? Et en cas de conflit, surtout dans la maison de formation, entre confrères, quels sont les mécanismes concrets de résolution des conflits? Et là, nous faisons appel à l'autorité. Quelle est sa place de leadership et résolution des conflits dans les maisons de formation?
Merci. Certainly, efforts at conflict resolution are important for a number of reasons. One is because it's a deep Christian value. Secondly, because your young men in formation need to see how you approach this. They need to be given some examples. So you as formation staff really need to think this through. We have examples before us where the church or church members have apologized, have sought reconciliation. I'm going back again to the matters of sexual abuse where various religious orders at different times have apologized publicly. And if you analyze that well, you will see that that was extremely difficult to do, and it normally took the religious orders a long time to get to that point. And it often has long-term effects in that people do feel some level of relief when reconciliation is searched for. Our young people want to see this. How is it done? On a corporate level, at a congregational level, at a community level, and at a personal level. And as formators, you're in a sense trying to hold all of this, those tensions I talked about, holding tensions, so that our younger people see the need for this and for the need to be faster at moving towards reconciliation than we have been in the past. We have some good examples before us, and we have some very poor examples of church before us seeking reconciliation. The other thing some congregations are asking me for, Joseph, is how can we reconcile within our congregation past hurts? So, for example, a congregation was founded in one particular national group. That group has gone to different parts of the world. At times, they have treated new members well in other parts of the world, and at times, they have treated new members as second-class citizens, second-class members. And that has created deep hurt, and it's historical hurt. And so some congregations are seeking ways to reconcile that, to at least try. And I'm impressed by the groups who approach me to try and look at this, because it's delicate and extremely painful. But that's reconciliation. So again, together as a team and conferring with others, you will work out what needs to be done and steps you may take. And we go back to that, one of those ideas up there of taking risks. In intercultural life and mission, we take risks. So rather than not do anything, we think, what might be the best thing for us to do in this situation? So it comes at various levels, but the idea of reconciliation, conflict resolution, I think is a very important one. And your radar is up all the time for this, both in your communities, also in your congregation, and in the church generally. And I trust that you have a lot of resource, a lot of personal and congregational resource in this area. I really do. Your youth and your energy are wonderful, wonderful characteristics of you as formators. Merci, Joseph. Vidi, an English group, English speaking group, excuse me.
So thank you, Tim. This group consists of Father Clement, Gulshan, Christopher Firi, Fernando, Jesutasan, and me myself, Vidi. So we have discussed what is surprising. We found too that you mentioned and connected interculturality with spirituality and also personality types. It is make us surprising. And what is new? That interculturality is integral part of evangelization, a part of spirituality. Need conversion, personally and communally, that we must leave our comfort zones in order to reach others. And that also interculturality is something connected to leadership. That's why it is intentional. And you also mentioned the connectivity between interculturality with gender. It is something new. Okay. So it makes us also, when participants, not only one, but we, by listening your presentation, more rejoice in realizing the differences between the members of the community. And the question, one, having been made aware of interculturality information, can we explore for discussion what avenues in view of better implementation? That's all. Thanks.
What's your second question, Widi? What's your second
question? Okay.
Yeah. The first one is very general. So is the second one
in what way?
a little more specific?
In what way can we explore more involvement or collaboration of opposite gender in our formation programs?
Okay. So let's, particularly for the sake of the online group, let's pick up that question. We do need better information about who we are as men in the world. And we need to seek that information. Some of our members are very, very poorly informed about what it is to be a man. And they rely on a lot of assumptions that come from their first cultural space. And they make the assumptions that everything they learned is perfectly fine for another cultural space. That is not the case. So to help our members do some work, again, back to the first cultural space. And this morning we asked the question, what do you like about being a man? And what do you not like about being a man, coming from your first cultural space? So helping our Formandi particularly to explore what it was like to grow up and learn how to be a man from their first culture, and some level of sharing there. So with the gender issues, you would actually start with me being a man, not what my understanding of women is, but start with, how do I understand myself as a man? Where does that come from? And when is my behavior as a man in my first culture perhaps not so appropriate in a second culture? Now, they can be quite good discussions, I think. And as formators, you too can share. To then move towards how do we understand women in the world, my suggestion is that you as formators invite a woman or some women that you trust, lay or religious, or indeed you invite a married couple, and that you do some work together with these people prior to any work they do with the community. And so you work out what it is you want to talk about and how you'd like to talk about it, to try and help the students feel comfortable and allowing them also to ask questions. So a married couple, how have they come to understand the well-being of the other? How do they move towards that? Or a religious sister, what does she want as far as treatment from male religious goals for her sisters? What does she hope for? And what does she find difficult? So some, again, adult conversations would be useful and helpful. And I think there is a lot of resource around, but because it's a generally taboo subject, we often don't try. But I think there's lots of creative possibilities in this. And it's particularly important as we move across and through cultures to be exploring this with each other. Okay, Willie. So the last group, Mauro, you were a member of that group. Who is the secretary? Mokone? Okay, Mokone.
Well, number one, we discovered the talents of Benjamin. He will deal with number one, I will deal with number two.
Benjamin, we're coming towards the end of our time, so please don't
Yes.
take too long.
What is surprising in our group and the new ideas is that the gender difference between men and women, conflict personalities, and the differentiation between cultural conflicts. And there is another surprise about the XY aged group. And there is a surprise about the relationship of moms with the Down syndrome children. That's all. The question over to Makone.
The question was more on the issue of being able to contain the tension. At one stage you mentioned it and it came out at several times, you know, when we have these differences, a leader must be able to contain the tension, and then maybe some other ways that are much more practical, just to explore a little bit on that, because it might be like some people might understand it differently and say containing tension maybe might mean suppressing it, but this might not be a very healthy way of dealing with it. So there could be, yeah.
Anthony Gittins, the writer that I've referred to a few times in this area, a Spiritan priest, a number of good points he makes that intercultural living is not natural. He says, but perhaps it's supernatural. And whatever it is, it's critical for religious life today, absolutely critical. He makes the point that religious congregations that do not take steps to embrace, understand, and live interculturally will die. He's very clear on this. Now, as you've said, Mokone, how do we hold those tensions? Sometimes we hold them like this. But Helen McBride, a previous Superior General of a Missionary Order of Women, would advise us to attempt to hold diversity lightly and do our best to rejoice in diversity, the best that we can. And so too often, with regard to interculturality, religious orders focus on the failures and the problems and lose sight so quickly of the successes and joys. The fact that you can eat together, you can pray together. This group here in this room, online at least we're talking to each other and listening. But this group of men here, you're listening respectfully to each other, you're making jokes with each other, you sing together. This is wonderful, truly wonderful that a group of relatively young men and some not so young would have this capacity to interact with one another with such joy and such naturalness. It's not so difficult. Now, there'd be other religious orders who would walk in here and say, how do you do this? And it's important for you sometimes to think, oh, yeah, how do we do this? Because we just do it now. 50 years ago, 80 years ago, it was a different story. But now your reality is such that there are many moments where you hold it lightly. Now, some of the topics we're talking about, taboo subjects, sex and sexuality, gender bridging, all of those things can sound really heavy. But in fact, they're just other elements of us being human in the world and interacting in intercultural ways. So if you are working in a team, formation team, and I hope you are, that you keep bringing this to one another. Say, well, yeah, this is a problem, but let's not forget that that social we had last week where everybody was involved and really enjoying, even the two guys who are learning language. Those other fellows found ways to include them and make them feel part of our group. Remember that. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what happened last week. So we can live some of the joys and rejoice a little, even as we are living some of the tensions. But formators today, probably more than ever, need to be people who can creatively hold tensions. And that's why it's important to work on a team where you actually have people with you that you, to some degree, trust so that you can do some sharing. Absolutely critical. If anyone's working alone, that's really hard for you, and probably you should be working towards having a partner, at least a partner, to work in your role with you. Because formation is not to be done by individuals these days, particularly intercultural formation. It's just too complex. And as I said, we're there to set people up to succeed, not set people up to fail. And we need to be working on teams to do that. It's a critical part of it. Okay, so I think time-wise, we are now coming to the end of our time together. So having now listened to one another's surprises and joys, and listened to questions and had some discussion around them, I hand back to you, Cornelius.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think the first thing to say is to invite a round of applause. So thank you. Unfortunately, we are all of us are not here in this room. Otherwise, you would have experienced the warmth of Oblate presence to acknowledge these days of sharing. Our last general chapter on the topic of interculturality, number 58 said this: we sometimes have to deconstruct our thinking in order to rebuild on new foundations. It seems to me that you have spent these 3 days to help us deconstruct and to rebuild. It has been a call to conversion, a call, as you said, to have gospel-centered communities, Christ-centered communities, Christ-centered formation houses. And the same applies to intergenerational communities too. So thank you for the invitation. I cannot say this, the gratitude on behalf of the formators. I think we're going to invite one of the formators to express the depth of our gratitude to you. So I invite Ross Kapunan to do that. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Cornelius. So, Tim, I don't know if there will be enough words to thank you, but still the same. Let me express that in behalf of the Oblate formators participating in this workshop, those physically present, and there in Rome, and those of us following online, I would like to express our sincerest gratitude to you and to your SPD community for lending you to us these 3 fruitful days. The SVDs are the front runners among the religious congregations in the study, in the promotion, and in the formation towards interculturality in the church. When we were, a few years ago, we attended the session in Nemi with many other women and men congregations. When we had our meeting in Asia Oceania as formators in Thailand several years ago, we also invited the former Superior General of SBD, Tony Pernia, and Father Sam Adtaraka, all SBD, to our formation program. Thus, we can say that the SBDs are not only our partners, but also our formators in this area. You have generously accepted our invitation several times now to help us understand deeper this theme and to equip us in the accompaniment of our formats and community. So thank you for your generous missionary availability and for sharing not only your knowledge and wisdom, but also your person and your valuable experiences to us. We are truly grateful of your presence here with and among us. This word of thanks is not enough to express our gratitude to you, so please accept the stipend that we are giving to you. So indeed, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.